Hi, and welcome to Chapter 14. In Chapter 14, we kind of change our discussion a little bit now that we've learned costs. And cost, it doesn't matter if you're in a perfectly competitive market, monopoly, or any of the other markets that we're going to study. However, what does look different is revenue and the demand curve. So we're going to go ahead and start with a perfectly competitive market. And we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth viewing the video prior to this one, short video. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick up on some of the other aspects that are important to know about the characteristics of a perfectly competitive market. So let's get to it. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay, good. So in this objective, we're going to explain some of the characteristics that make up a perfectly competitive market. Okay, so basically we're going to define what that is in this chapter. We're also going to kind of look at marginal revenue. I discussed it a little bit, but we're going to look at it specifically in a perfectly competitive market and how it's related to total and average revenue. Then in objective 3, we take a look at how do we decide at what quantity that a perfectly competitive market will want to produce. Objective 4 looks at how a perfectly competitive firm, why might it shut down and why might it exit? And then our last objective takes a look at the short run and long-term market supply curves in a perfectly competitive market. Okay, so we're going to start with kind of a scenario. And here's our scenario. 3 years after graduating, you run your own business. Okay, I've done it. Wow, there's a lot to it. Okay, so you have to decide some key questions. How much to produce, what price to charge, and how many workers to hire. Each of these questions, one of the things that influence those questions will be the idea of what industry are you in. Okay, so depending on the industry, you're going to answer these questions in a very different way. So you might be thinking some of the factors. We might think about obviously the costs that we've studied already, but also, what's the demand? What's the market for this good or service? How much competition do you face? So all of these things will become either barriers or opportunities. In business, we call it an opportunity and threats if they're outside the organization. And then you hope to take those things, strengths and weaknesses, which are inside the organization, to capitalize on your opportunities and thwart your threats. Okay. So let's take a look at a perfectly competitive market. Remember that a perfectly competitive market, we have many buyers and many sellers. So one thing we like to say here is that there's no one who has more, I'm searching for the word, no power, okay, in the market. If anyone has power in this market, the power is going to reside with the buyer, okay, if anyone has any kind of power here. The goods are homogeneous. And so now we can talk a little bit about homogeneous goods here. So because all the goods are the same or homogeneous, what that means is that we are facing a perfectly elastic demand curve, because everything is the same. So this is a key kind of feature to a perfectly competitive market, hence the term perfectly, right? Perfectly elastic demand, perfectly competitive market. And there are no barriers to entry. And by barriers to entry, Michael Porter, who is one of the heads of the strategic management at Harvard, came up with several different books, and he uses the term barriers to entry and barriers to exit. Okay, in this market, we don't have any. And it's also really easy to get into business, really easy to go out of business. So what do you need to do to get into business? Well, you need to go down and fill out a doing business as form and set up. You can actually use your social security numbers, your tax ID, and you're done. I mean, it can be that simple. Exiting, how do you exit? You just simply quit selling, okay? You quit doing or selling the product. It's that simple. Now, one of the important terms to know is because of 1 and 2, we're going to say everyone in this market is a price taker. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at revenue of a perfectly competitive firm. Remember, total revenue is just our price times our quantity. Average revenue, and remember that term average just means that we're taking whatever the base is here, it's revenue, and we're dividing it by the quantity. So you'll see it is total revenue divided by the quantity. Now, I'm going to talk about this in just a moment, but when we look at a perfectly competitive market, and only in a perfectly competitive market will average revenue equal price, which also equals marginal revenue. We're going to illustrate that in a few slides coming up. Remember, marginal revenue is just the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity, and that's the incremental. You're probably already thinking about this, and remember, marginal is the slope of whatever we're talking about. So, in fact, the marginal revenue curve is the slope of the total revenue curve. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. And again, I'm going to draw the formulas above here. So our total revenue is just price times quantity. Average revenue, remember that's the base revenue in this case. So it's total revenue divided by quantity. And marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. Okay? So if we have a price of $10, no quantity, 10 times 0 is 0, right? That's why this is not applicable and this is shaded out. 1 times 10 is 10. 2 times 10 is 20. And 3 times 10 is 30. Now you're seeing a pattern, and you should. Average revenue is just total revenue divided by quantity, so 20 divided by 2 would give us 10. 30 divided by 3 is 10, and so on. Okay, for marginal revenue, we're going to take a look at how did total revenue change divided by the quantity. So to fill this block in here, we're going to say, well, we went from 0 to 10, right? So 10 minus 0 equals 10 over our change in quantity of 1 minus 0, which equals 1. So the marginal revenue here is 10. Just so that you can understand, I'll do the next one. So 20 minus 10 equals 10. We're going to go ahead and divide that by 2 minus 1, which equals 1, so 10. And so on, and so on. So notice that in this perfectly competitive market, here's the price. The price is 10. Notice the average revenue is also 10. Marginal revenue is also 10. So in a perfectly competitive market, price will equal marginal revenue, which equals average revenue. Only in a perfectly competitive market will that occur. Okay. All right, so marginal revenue equaling price. So what's interesting is we can keep increasing output but not have a lot of effect on the market price. So let's take a look at what this might look like. And actually, we're going to do that in the next objective. But just as a little teaser, if we have quantity and we have price, wherever price is at, that's our demand curve, which is also our price, which is also marginal revenue, which is also average revenue. Only in a perfectly competitive market will that occur. Okay, so that is the end of this objective, and I look forward to seeing you for objective 2, where we can start working with some graphs and put total cost, marginal cost, and average cost together with this. Thanks.